Good afternoon,
Okay,
Eric.
we're rolling.
We're rolling. How you doing?
Fine, thank you. And you?
I'm all right. How is it in the big city?
It's hot. Hot down summer in the city. The back of my neck, ladies and gentlemen, is getting dirty and gritty.
Is it? Do you have that classic Manhattan urine smell of June?
Dude, stop insulting my city already.
It's a signature feature. It's what makes it gritty.
Oh, I see I'm freezing here on the screen. You know, I promised Comrade Wright that I would install more memory so that my image would stop freezing. And I meant to yesterday, and I tried even, but the memory slot that I bought, there was already one there, and there didn't seem to be another slot. And I didn't really trust myself not to screw up the whole computer, so I'm going to freeze a little more today, and then next time I do this show, I'll try not to freeze so much. My apologies
We don't
to
need
the rapt audience.
We don't need to start over though.
No, it's not going to change anything, because they told me not to run any other programs while I do this, and that's the reason, but nothing else is running. It's just that 512 is not enough memory to run one of these damn things. You need a gig, and I was a little reluctant to install it yesterday in a short period of time because I'm not that much of a computer stud.
They can put a man on the moon, but they can't give a computer with enough memory.
Okay.
So shall we get to it?
You're the boss.
All right. So Dick Lugar seemed to make some waves this week by criticizing the surge. And there's all this hubbub that Republicans are breaking away from the president, but I remain very skeptical that this is a substantive break in policy. But I'm curious what you think. If you think this is an actual tide turning, or is this just a kabuki dance?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think that Republicans in general realize that it is political suicide to be attached to Bush's hip on the war in 2008, but they can't walk away from maintaining a permanent presence in Iraq substantively. They can't fundamentally change the essence of the policy course, so they do superficial disagreements. I think the troop level should be reduced to some degree, but push comes to shove, they won't vote for an actual end to the occupation. So
I feel very certain that the war is not going to end before Bush leaves office. And then it probably won't end for a long time afterward. Bush is just not going to let it happen. He'd much rather see innocent people die than admit an error. In fact, it's not even a choice for him. And if it were a choice, Cheney wouldn't let him do it. So the war is going to go on. The question, therefore, is entirely, in my view, one of politics. Democrats can't stop the war. So the question is how can they milk the war so that they have the largest possible victory in 2008 and are in the best position to actually make that victory meaningful. Bill Clinton had a victory in two victories, but they weren't all that meaningful because he didn't have carrying majority in either election, and the Congress was recalcitrant, even under the Democrats. And the media were against him after the election, not during the election, but after the election. So, politically speaking, is it meaningful that Lugar's moved? You know, Lugar's always been sort of a reasonable fellow as a Republican. And he's always had a reputation of being a reasonable fellow, and therefore he's never really been close to the people in the Bush administration. The neocons have never trusted him. So I think that he's the kind of guy that, you know, they like to have on the Sunday shows, and it further weakens Bush. But Bush can be as weak as as anything. I don't have a metaphor in mind, and still attack Iran, and still keep the troops there. So the question is will Lugar carry anyone in the Republican Party with him? I don't see it. I mean, I don't know who Lugar's constituency is besides the the op-ed page and the Sunday windbags.
Well, I fully agree with you that I don't think the war is going to end while Bush remains in office. Even if I think Congress passed something that was seemingly binding, I think Bush would just ignore it, and as they don't seem to care about checks and balances and co-equal branches and all the like. So
right, we agree on that.
Yeah. So the question is, what do you do about that politically? And I see a danger in blurring the lines. I think you want to make very clear who is against maintaining an occupation, who is for it, so there can be a clear choice at the ballot box in 2008, and you can expand that majority so you can fundamentally end things. If you elevate a guy like Lugar, who, quite frankly, I would have put in the sort of internationalist realist camp until this speech this week, where he explicitly says in the speech that we should maintain a military presence in Iraq in part to, quote, protect oil flows.
Well, I'm not sure we shouldn't maintain a military presence in Iraq. I think that's a very complicated issue.
For what period of time?
50 years.
I would have to disagree with you on that point.
I'm not surprised, but I'm not sure that it's not the case. Nevertheless, as reluctant as I am to make that conclusion. But you know what I think is going to happen off the top of my head? I think it's going to be a lot like 1968, where the person who gets the nomination will be the person who is loyal to the president and does not cause any waves. But then during the election, that person will find that position to be untenable and will find a way during the election to say, actually, I've changed my mind and I'm for peace too, and in fact I can deliver peace because I'm one of these bad guys in the first place. Humphrey did it much too late in '68. It was not credible, but he did do it. And I think the Republican who gets who wins, it's just a variation of running right in the primary and towards the center in the general. But he'll need to appear to be loyal to Bush, because the base is still loyal to Bush. I noticed that Bush lost Ann Coulter last week, but the base is still loyal to Bush, and they will stay loyal to Bush, because if they're not loyal to Bush, they, like Bush, will have to admit that they've been idiots for the past 7 years, and nobody wants to do that. And then after the nomination is settled, that person will then have the freedom to sort of renounce their former selves, because A, the media never hold people accountable for anything that ever happened in the past, unless it's a sex act. And B, and even then, if you're a Republican, it doesn't seem to matter so much. I mean, what Gingrich ditched his 2 wives and had one of them get welfare because he wouldn't support his family, and nobody seems to worry about that. All right, that's off the topic. But anyway, they will distance themselves from the Bush policy. They will say that maybe they'll even say they have a secret plan, like Nixon did. But the point is that you can't move too far away from Bush in the nomination process, and you can't be too supportive of the war in the general election process. And I'm pretty sure that the media are going to let any Republican who gets the nomination get away with that. Fred Thompson certainly is not. He's not married to the war, He's not denouncing it, but he's not married to it.
He's saber-rattling about Iran.
Yeah. Well, sure, he's talking to the base. But he's not doing anything he can't take back to the general.
Well, that's what I wonder about. I mean, I don't see so much, when I watch these Republican debates, I don't see too much loyalty to Bush. I do see a continuing or an amplifying of this sort of World War III metaphor, that we're already in World War III. We're facing an Islamo-fascist threat, a singular threat. It's us against all the brown people, and therefore we have to stay in Iraq. And in some cases, people are more explicitly saying we have to push on into Iran. It doesn't seem to be tied to Bush at all. And I wonder how easy it would be to move away from that come the general. Or are they so committed, or do they actually believe it? Or just by saying it over and over again will be too hard to walk away from?
I don't think it'll be hard to walk away from. Look, who watches these debates? Nobody but the base and the media. So they can say whatever they want now and not worry about it. I don't think it matters. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of appearing tough, and you gotta look really tough against these other crazies. And then in the general, it's easier to look tough because the Democrats are perceived as wimps by the media and by much of the public. So you don't have to sound quite as tough, but nobody's saying that they'll actually do anything. Nobody's saying they'll have to. Nobody's saying anything they'll have to explicitly take back. Unless they misspeak in some way. And I think that there's a sort of tacit understanding that I once covered Lee Atwater, and he used to talk about the extra chromosome Republicans who had he used to joke about them having hands coming out of their heads, And those are the people who are the real Republicans that, who show up at demonstrations and stuff. And these people are very important for the activist base. And they need their red meat or they're not going to turn out. So they're being given their red meat, but they're not being given much in the way of actual promises. most of the promises have to do with abortion. You can't really promise, to do anything about war because who knows what's going to happen. And also, what you don't want is you don't want to be the candidate who is the anti-Bush candidate in the nomination process. You might want to be that in general, but you don't want to be the one who is perceived as disloyal to Bush. And look, it's true McCain's candidacy has turned out to be a complete bust so far. But what choice did he have but to try and make up with this man who trashed his character and his life, because that's where the party was.
Well, so come the general, presuming all of this is true, they throw the red meat to the base, one of them gets nominated, someone has to be the last man standing. You're in the general now. What is the Iraq debate, Iran debate, foreign policy debate going to be? Is it going to be like a 2000 where both Democrat and Republican are blurring the lines and sounding the same, or is there going to be an actual debate over what to do next?
Well, look, there'll be differences. I do think Fred Thompson is I would bet someone a lot of money that he's going to get the nomination. I just feel the cards are all lined up for him. And he can, he just has to sound tough. He doesn't have to have an actual policy laid out. With the Democrats, they're under a bit more pressure because Democrats have to prove that they're strong and quote-unquote strong enough in national security to win an election. Kerry didn't prove that, and that's why he lost the election. To me, it's that simple. The entire issue was whether or not people felt like they could trust Kerry with the national security. There was an 18% gap on that question. Ipso facto, the election goes the way it did. So the Democrats will have to come up with a position that it both sounds tough, but also acknowledges that the war is a catastrophe and has to be done with it. And it's not going to be easy. Because the obvious things to do, which are like what I would do, I think, when I say stay in Iraq for 50 years, I mean as part of an international force that is not led by the United States.
That's certainly very different than what I think a lot of neocons would want.
Yeah, sure, of course. It's the opposite. But I would go in, I would stay in, I think you have to stay in, or you might have to stay in, as either a NATO force or a UN force.
Well, Bill Richardson suggests an all-Muslim peacekeeping force. Is that something you could get behind?
Well, that'd be great. I just think it's probably a pipe dream. I mean, I don't see Muslims volunteering for that. But, that would be nice. I certainly wouldn't be against it. But even so, what I wouldn't be against, I'm not running for president. Democrats have to prove that they're tough. They have to prove that they're going to kill people. They're not afraid to kill people, that they don't mind killing people, because that's what Americans wanted a presidential candidate.
Well, didn't Kerry say all those things?
Not convincingly. I think that the atmosphere has changed. Bush appeared more competent in 2004 than he does today, and so the Democrats have an opening. But they still need to address this problem. They can't solve it. It's impossible to solve. I mean, I've been thinking about it for years now, since I've been writing this book. I'm looking forward to reading young Matt Iglesias' book on liberalism and foreign policy, because he's writing about this issue. But the conundrum of sounding tougher than these lunatics who want to blow up every country that looks the wrong way at them, and at the same time having a sensible foreign policy in a very complex world where many of the most important threats are not even military, is a really, really tough thing to deal with. I've read all the reports on this topic that all the groups have issued, and nobody's really figured out how to do it. So the Democrats can do a better job than they've done in the past, but they can't solve it. And that's actually, I'm worried about this election. If Thompson gets the nomination, and the Democrats haven't solved their foreign policy thing, or if they nominate a candidate who already has 50% of the country saying they will not vote for him or her, it's going to be a very close election, even though the issues and the country, the mood of the country and the issues and everything else is way favorable for Democrats. They could still lose the presidential election.
Maybe we should move on to a fresh topic.
You're the boss?
All right. Shifting to domestic issues, just Congress in general, we're about 6 months into a new Congress. There has been a whole lot of legislation that has been passed and approved. Is that more the fault of the tactics of the congressional leadership, or is that more the fault of obstructionists in the conservative minority?
You know, I have no idea. I don't really follow this. What do you think? Why don't you tell us?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay. Why? A little bit of what? A little bit of how?
I mean, at a fundamental level, conservatives are obstructing several things. They have blocked empowering Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices. They have blocked knocking down obstacles to unionization. They have blocked some key energy planks in the Senate for renewable energy. And I mean, I think those are the biggest things right now. Stem cells got vetoed. That wasn't a filibuster. That was a veto. But still, these are all issues that have majority support in the public, in Congress, and a minority of folks have blocked them. At the same time, I don't think many people in the public are putting the blame on the conservative minority at this point, because most of these filibusters have happened very quietly. You don't really hear about them. All you really notice is that there's a lot of inaction about a lot of top issues, and obviously the Iraq debacle, having half a showdown and then sort of giving in to Bush at the end, made people feel like the Democrats, the congressional leadership, caved in. What I think Democrats could do differently is when some of these popular issues are being filibustered, to keep it on the floor and have an extended filibuster and raise the profile of that issue so people see, here's what I'm fighting for. I think this is in line with what you want us to do and what you elected us to do, and here are clearly the individuals that are getting in the way. And either you build in the public pressure that you can then get the 60 votes to break a filibuster, or you have very clear lines drawn that people can then make informed decisions about come 2008 and give the majorities that you need.
You may be right. First of all, there's only so much time in a day. There's only so many things I can pay attention to. I let this one slide. But one reason I let it slide, one of many reasons, is that I think Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid are pretty capable. And I think Rahm is pretty smart politically. And I've got a few liberal friends in Congress, and they have quite a bit of confidence in Nancy Pelosi, even though they're not happy with a lot of the things she's done. Just as a they have confidence in her as political strategist, and so I'm just going to defer to them, because everything that one would like a politician to do, there's a cost to it. There's a problem with it, and you have to pick and choose. And I don't think, Bill, that there's a big gulf between what you want to see happen with this legislation and what Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi want to see happen with this legislation. You didn't used to be able to say that about the Democrats. The Democrats have moved much closer, I think, to their constituencies in terms of how they see the world. And they're saying this is the best we can do. Now, again, I have no idea if they're right, but I was very... I found it rather distasteful, all the blogosphere attacks on the Democrats for losing the war vote. They lost it. It wasn't their fault. They didn't have the votes. What do you want from them? What are they supposed to do? They just didn't have the votes for closure. So, there was a really stupid article in Rolling Stone, I think, by Matt Taibbi, saying that the Democrats were trying to extend the war. The Democrats can't stop this war. It would be great if they could, but they can't. So what do you do in the absence of that? It's not clear.
Well, and I think you're right. There's not a lot of substantive disagreement that I would have or you would have with the congressional leadership right now. These are tactical questions.
Right, but why can't we defer to them? Why can't we say they're the pros and we're not? In this case. Because there they are and we're not.
Well, there's an argument for that where my concern lies right now. You have congressional approval below Bushian levels, which is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And my concern is that there's a punditocracy view that you should govern, you should do the noble thing and work across the aisle and forge grand compromises and actually govern and not be political.
Right, broderism.
Right, which
high broderism, I believe.
Right. And I agree with that halfway, except you can't forge noble compromises with people who fundamentally disagree with you. There has to be some common ground to work with. And if you're dealing with folks that are not just disagree with you on the fundamentals, but are outright interested in obstructing your progress and your ability to succeed. Immigration is the classic example. They try to find a middle ground when no middle ground exists, and so it fell apart on them twice. And now they look like they have failed, quote unquote, when in fact they were engaging in an issue where, well, they're going to fail one way or the other, because if you have an obstructionist minority that can block things with 41 votes, you're not going to get very far. The question is, what does that failure look like? Does it look like you failed, or does it look like you are doing all you can and someone else is getting in your way?
Yeah, well, I think I'm all right with what they're doing now, because I think I'm all right. Like I said, I don't know too much about it, but I followed the immigration pretty carefully. And I think what they're doing is they're saying we're the reasonable folks, and it's these crazy lunatics that won't let us get anything done. We're reasonable about the war, we're reasonable about immigration, we're reasonable about stem cells. We are reasonable, and we can't get anything done because we're still dealing with irrational and unreasonable leadership.
Well, they're not making that second part of the argument.
The positions they're taking is we want to make a deal because we're interested in governing and we're responsible. And they won't let us. If they demagogue the stuff the way the Republicans do, or they had a showdown on everything, they would lose that aura of reasonability. And because Broder-esque types simply assume conservatives are reasonable but liberals are crazy, they need to do this a little bit more than we would like. But I think it may just be a sound strategy.
Well, I agree with the high Broderism halfway, and I agree with what you're saying in general. You definitely want to show to the public that you're serious about governing, and that you're reasonable in your approach, and that you're in line and you're doing what the people have asked you to do on these main issues. The question then becomes, what's the best way to convey that? Is it to propose, incremental, mushy middle kind of stuff where you arouse your opponents, but you don't really arouse your supporters? And so what happens in the end is that you fail, you get obstructed.
Are you feeling insufficiently aroused, Bill?
I'm sorry?
Are you feeling insufficiently aroused?
I'm not aroused
because
at
after
all.
all, this is the internet, and there are no laws about it yet. Ted Stevens hasn't gotten his hands on the tubes yet, so feel free to arouse your viewership as much as you like.
It was hard to get people excited about the immigration bill because there were a lot of untoward elements about it, even though there were some humane aspects of it.
Yeah, but look, the immigration bill, which I supported, because I support any immigration bill, really, that was a big win for the Democrats. It tore the Republican Party apart. It made them look like idiots. It made Hispanics hate them even more, and the Democrats got to look reasonable.
Well, I think that happened in 2006. Republicans have been looking unreasonable.
No, it happened on the immigration bill, on this particular.
Well, I mean about the immigration issue. I think they.
But I'm just saying, look at the results of the reasonable position that they took on immigration. Nobody could like everything in that bill, but the Democrats said, "We're here to govern. This is the best we can do. We're willing to go with it because we came here to do the people's job."
I'm not sure that's the net result.
No, forget it. We're crazy. We're insane. And now the Hispanics hate them more than they ever did. And the pundits are all saying that Bush is a loser and the party's in an uproar and McCain went down the tubes. It's great.
I completely agree that they have lost Latino votes over this whole issue, and I think that's a major reason why they lost the Congress in 2006. I don't know if that has...
Fastest growing ethnic group in America.
I totally agree. And this was a Bush Rove project to not have that happen, to try to capture a share of Latino votes. And that was undermined by the base. I think what happened here is a continuation of that. I don't think that is a new development because of how this played out in the floor of the Senate. What I'm concerned about is what the net result's going to be now is a spate of articles about how Democrats can't govern, can't get things done, can't forge these grand compromises, and that is going to be.
But you see, this is my whole question in life. Compared to what? What articles would you have gotten if you had gone the other way? This way, their response can be, look, we tried to govern. We were the reasonable folks. It's these lunatics that we started to get rid of in 2006, and now we have to finish the job.
Well, that's what they'll say, and my concern is that it would be harder to make that argument if what bills are on the table aren't as bold and as comprehensive and as workable as they could have otherwise been, when they're more in the mushy
But
middle
dude,
incremental
nobody
tip.
looks at the content of bills. I mean, immigration is unusual because there's so many crazy people exercised about it. But nobody cares about what's actually in the bills. It's all how you posture about it.
No one's going to delve into the nitty gritty of a 300-page bill, but there are certain. I think the things like the temporary guest worker program.
No, I told you immigration is an exception.
Right. But even on the nativist right was all exercise about the details. But on our side, I think you might have gotten more folks energized into the whole discussion. In many cases, a lot of liberals slept on this. Have slept on a lot of things.
But immigration, nobody really cares about on the left. The only people who really care about it, the unions care about it a little, but actually unions have gotten rather sympathetic to immigrant labor in recent years. They've been organizing it, and they decided they'd rather switch than fight. And the other people who care about it are people who are sort of bleeding heart liberals and care about the plight of the immigrant. But they don't. They're a small group of people. It's not a big issue in the Democratic coalition, and I would argue those people are completely wrong-headed because it's the powerless immigrant who suffers the worst under the current system. But anyway, there isn't. Immigration is a wonderful issue because the Republican coalition is fundamentally at odds with itself. You have the business part that wants cheap labor and a cheap labor pool, and then you have the nativists who don't like immigrants, and also people who feel like if you break the law, you see them on Colbert and Stewart, they should be shot. And they're both very real, and neither one has any interest in giving in to the other side. It's not like big business can give the Christian right their part because it doesn't really impinge on them. They can't give them anything because they're dependent on all these industries are dependent on this cheap labor, cheap exploited, unprotected labor. So the Democrats aren't in that position because, as I said, the only conflict within the Democratic side comes from big labor, and big labor is it has softened quite a bit, and also it's not that powerful anymore. So the more we fight about immigration, the better for the Democrats because of the importance of Hispanics.
Well, there are other issues. I mean, just get immigration for a bit. Take healthcare and energy, environmental issues. I would say are maybe higher priorities on your average liberal's domestic issues checklist. Things that they get more generally excited about. But what has happened in the Congress so far on that have been a couple of attempts empowering Medicare for to negotiate for lower drug prices. There's an energy bill out of the Senate that is not bad. It's better than nothing. And the signals are that there will be more happening later in the year on it, so I don't want to totally dump on them on the entire energy issue just yet. But there were a couple of elements that got filibustered, increasing renewable electricity.
I have an announcement to make, which is that my phone light is beeping, so we might lose me, and if we do, I'd like to say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you. The battery's going to go
dead. We'll stick with it
dead
until it disappears. It's just, I'll hold it up to the camera. Can you see it there, people? It's like the battery is a problem. There it is. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. More renewable electricity, more tax credits for wind and solar. These are things that got filibustered but never really got elevated into the national discourse. There's no media attention about it. But I think if there was media attention, if there was an extended filibuster, an extended confrontation, you might see more liberals get enthusiastic and drive these issues the way the nativist right drove immigration for the last several weeks. And if that happened, there'd be more of a sense that this Congress is fighting for big things, big ideas, trying to make some reasonable change, trying to actually govern, but is being stymied by, a dinosaur obstructionist right. And that sense isn't there right now, so I'm worried the net result of a lot of this is not going to be we're the reasonable ones, they're the crazy. It's going to be what have you been doing all this time? Even that may not be fair, but I'm worried that's going to be the perception.
You may be right, sir.
Do you want to go to a new topic, or do you want to
keep going? Keep going. It's just at some point this phone's going to die, but let's go with it until it does.
Okay. Supreme Court. There was a sense when John Roberts and Sam Alito were nominated that these were reasonable conservatives. They're brilliant men There's no logical. It would be political and partisan to deny these guys a lifetime appointment, and now all of a sudden everyone's realized, oh my lord, this is actually a much more conservative court. What does this actually mean? So I guess my question to you is, how do you think we let these guys get on the court in the first place?
I didn't let them.
We in general, we as a collective group, not you and me as individuals.
I don't know anybody that voted for them.
I would argue that within the larger liberal activist community, more so with Roberts than Alito, but in general, there was not a lot of action energy. There was sort of a resigned shrug. What can you do? Elections have consequences. These guys, they use big words. They like grammar. They sound reasonable on NPR. I guess I got to let these guys through.
Look,
could have been worse.
I read this book by Jan Greenberg on the Supreme Court, so I know a little something about it. I'm looking forward to my friend Jeffrey Toobin's book on the same topic. I'm not going to read Jeffrey Rosen's book because that's just too many damn books on one topic.
I think your prioritization is accurate.
But look, Bork told the truth when he testified at his hearings, and he didn't get the seat because he told the truth, because he had crazy views and they were organizable around because he laid out what they were. Ever since Bork, no one has gone in there and told the truth, because if you do, you're giving people an excuse to organize a campaign around you. So when Alito and Roberts testified, they just gave a bunch of airy cliches. They didn't really answer any questions. Joe Biden spoke for 30 straight minutes. I mean, I think the Democrats did a terrible job during those hearings of trying to demonstrate just how extreme these guys were and how extreme was the president and the party that was nominating them. I thought they should have been part of a political campaign that we're the reasonable people, they're the crazy people. But I never thought they had a chance of beating them. And I do think that, the media, I think your analysis is correct about the mainstream media. David Brooks wrote a really ridiculous column where he was attacking the Democrats for not supporting Alito because they said ethnics used to appeal to Democrats and now they don't, as if the guy's extremist right-wing views had no bearing on anything. It's just that they should like him because he's an ethnic. But the fact is that, power wins. How many troops does the Pope have? Democrats didn't have the troops to beat these people. They did a bad job of drawing out how right-wing they were, but they couldn't have beaten them. And I'm always a little, I find it odd that the Democrats and liberals aren't, don't jump on my anti-extremism bandwagon. Like if you read the note, it's actually different now under Rick Klein than it was under Mark Halpern. But Mark Halpern used to include all of these completely crazy people as if they were reasonable as part of the discourse. The Wall Street Journal editorial page, the New York Post, the Washington Times, as if these people mattered. And they only matter because the mainstream media says they matter. But, if you read a typical Deborah Orrin column or a typical Wall Street Journal editorial, it's completely nuts. It goes off the rails. It makes a few points, and then you just can't even follow it a good part of the time. So I would say that the Democrats have been cowed to some degree by the fact that they've always felt that their constituency was the editorial pages, and these editorial pages, the discourse itself is tilted toward the right. There was a great moment. Who did it? Was it Byron Dorgan who denounced the Washington Post on the floor? And he said, I'm really sick of hearing the Washington Post tell us that we don't know how to handle the country's security. They supported this stupid war, and they got no right to tell us what to do. We were the ones who, we here tried to do something about it, and they've been wrong the whole time, and they should just shut up. And I think that the Democrats need to, stake out a position which says the other side has behaved really irresponsibly, and we're the responsible people. And you may not agree with us, but you can trust us to be responsible. The same way Bush says you may not agree with us, may not agree with me, but you can trust me to do what I think is right. Well, who cares what you think is right? Everything you think is right is wrong. You're an extremist. Democrats should do that, and I think what's preventing them from doing that is this insider punditocracy beltway class that is still enthralled to these clowns in the Bush administration and in the neoconservative movement.
Well, and as far as the Supreme Court goes with along those lines, I don't just blame Democratic senators for failing to challenge, the media narratives on those nominees. I think this was a group failure. If you're gonna successfully filibuster a nominee, I mean, Democrats had the numbers to do it. They had more than 41 senators, but they need to have some sense that they had the wind behind their back. There was public opinion behind that, and that requires a coordinated team effort, which just wasn't there from the get-go.
No, but it required them to be able to demonstrate that these guys were outside the mainstream.
Right.
And these guys didn't give them what they needed.
There should have been an expectation because
nobody tells the truth anymore. And
right.
Ted Kennedy, whom I love, did a really stupid job with abortion. I forget it was Roberts or Alito, and grandstanding on that issue in such a way that nobody found credible.
The dynamics have changed post-Bork. No one tells the truth. Everyone is very dodgy and speaks a lot of vague legalistic generalities. But you have to factor that into your strategies. I was involved with a feminist nonprofit, a legal nonprofit, around the time of Roberts, and I told various folks that, look, there's two kinds of nominees you can get: one with a paper trail and one without. And Roberts was on the short list of people who did not have one. You had to have a strategy to deal with that fact, and to be able to set a bar that was not just as long as you don't screw up in the nomination hearing, you get a free pass. You need to have a bar saying you need to show me evidence that you have a judicial philosophy that's in the mainstream, because this is a lifetime appointment. We need proof here.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't work.
It might not have worked.
It wouldn't work because they would just say, "Tough luck. I'm the president's nominee. You're going to vote a bit. Go vote against me. Vote against me. I'm still going to win."
That may be. It may be that it was just too hard of a. You're behind the eight ball there, and it was never going to get done no matter what you did. But what you would have at least accomplished is establish what your principles were as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, so you'd be able to set the table well for someone who did have a paper trail.
But you think that what's important is establishing a principle of the Supreme Court, and what most politicians think is important is being liked. It's being seen as a decent guy. It's being seen as a reasonable person. And your strategy risks that, and it risks that for a strategy that's likely to lose. So it doesn't seem to me to be something that most politicians want to embrace.
Well, they didn't. I imagine for many of the reasons that you're saying. But it seems to me that the Supreme Court is a pretty big Megillah. If you don't handle that issue correctly and you lose the court altogether, you don't get anything you want for decades.
Yeah, they did terribly, and it's a terrible situation. And thanks, Ralph. But it's it's just like Iraq. It's just goddamn terrible. It stinks.
Well, I hope that at least now
there isn't much you can do about it.
Well, I hope there's a difference now, because the conservatives have not fully captured the court. Kennedy is a swing vote, maybe a weaker swing than O'Connor, but still a swing. And the next nominee, if it's coming from a conservative president, is going to be a big deal. So hopefully people can take what Roberts and Alito have done and not allow, and so if the next nominee tries to run the same game plan that they did, we can make that much harder for them, because we can take what they've done on the court and contrast with what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, I don't think Bush is going to get another nomination.
A lot of old folks on the court, you never know.
Yeah. True, I don't like to predict the future.
Right.
But I don't like to have to worry about that. I have enough to worry about, so I'm not going to worry about that. All right, so what's our last topic, Bob?
You want to do Michael Moore in healthcare, or do you want to do Ann Coulter?
I don't really like to talk about Ann Coulter.
Well, then let's not. Sicko, I think by the time this airs on Blogging Ads will probably have formally been released across the country. What strikes me as interesting about this is really the first Michael Moore film that focuses on a single issue exclusively.
Yeah.
And I think remains to be seen, can he make a demonstrable impact on that issue with a film? And I don't know the answer to that.
Good question. Good framing of the question.
Thank you. Bowling for Columbine was about gun control, but it was sort of about the culture of guns in America. He was not campaigning to ban guns or to have certain regulations be installed. Fahrenheit 11 was generally to get Bush out of office, but it wasn't really a single issue.
Well, Sicko is a much, much better movie than either of those two.
You've seen Sicko?
Yeah.
I've not seen it yet.
It's a really good movie. It's an interesting, funny movie about healthcare, which is really odd, I didn't like Bowling for Columbine at all, and I saw it in Europe actually, and I really didn't like it. I felt it was anti-American actually. I mean, the whole theme of Bowling for Columbine seemed to be that Americans were jerks. Fahrenheit 9/11 I had more complicated feelings about. I liked it and I didn't like it. Sicko, I like 93% of it. The 7% I don't like is his unwillingness to stick in a sentence there saying, by the way, Cuba's not a paradise. The same way he wouldn't do it with Iraq, pre-war Iraq, in Fahrenheit. I don't know why he won't do it. It's so easy, and it's so obvious, and it's such a predictable.
Not as provocative, though.
What?
Not as provocative.
No, but he actually goes the other way. He actually he pretends it's ridiculous to have any problems with Cuba. And so it's just he's leading with his chin in that regard. I read that somewhere, that phrase, but I'm expropriating it. Other than that, though, it's a wonderful movie. It's good humored. Michael Moore is likable. It's not sledgehammery. It's just clever and fun and very, very effective propaganda. And it's all true. You know, it's not maybe not balanced. My friend Jonathan Cohn has some problems with it. He's written a very good book about health care problems.
Sick.
Sick. So I'm sure he's right about whatever he said in those regards. But it's a movie. It's not a 300-page policy wonky book. And the thing about Fahrenheit, even though I thought he had some crazy ideas in it about the pipeline and about Iraq, was every single thing he said in it was footnotable and it turned out to be true. In fact, one of my ex-interns I saw him at the opening. He was one of the researchers for this movie. They make Moore said at the opening, I make sure to get everything right because I am making a political argument. I have to have my facts down. So I'm hoping that the way the media treat Moore, as a boogeyman or have in the past, won't. I hope that the media will be open to allowing this conversation to take place because most people I think do support single payer health care, and I don't think we're going to get it because I think, like so many issues, it doesn't matter what most people think. It matters what the powerful people think, and the powerful people don't want it. But we can certainly move a lot further in that direction and strengthen a president, a Democratic president, and Democratic Congress to actually do something. And hopefully the New Republic won't be edited by someone like Andrew Sullivan, and we won't have an article like Betsy McCoy's that scares people into thinking they can't have their own doctor. And in other words, I hope that our side is not undermined by our side again by people who just can't see that 60-70% of a loaf is better than no loaf at all. I picked on the New Republic, but I shouldn't have. It was more important that people in Congress didn't go along. But I think, like I said, I guess my larger point here is that it's good to have people on our side who can reach the mainstream, like Moore can, with these well-funded, well-planned, well-disciplined campaigns. I wish Moore himself would be a little bit more disciplined. And I think you put the question very well, is what effect will it have on the ultimate discourse over healthcare? Because otherwise it's just a movie that makes people feel good. And that's really what Fahrenheit was. And it actually, in many ways, had a negative effect because it seemed to gin up the other side, at least as much as it inspired the good guys.
But you don't necessarily have a feeling, having seen the movie, what kind of overall impact is it going to have on the discourse? Is it going to change what comes out of Congress in the short term? Is it going to change the tenor of the presidential debate?
I'm actually teaching a course next year at the Graduate School of Journalism at City University that I made up called The Role of Ideas in Journalism. And I could use Sicko as an example, maybe I will, of how ideas enter the system and what effect they have and what difference they make. I was going to use An Inconvenient Truth, and of course the classics in the past like Silent Spring or Other America and so forth. But it's very unpredictable. It's very hard to know. It's a very, very difficult thing to do to move the discourse with an artifact like a movie or a book.
Well, I think Inconvenient Truth did. I think taking the global warming isn't happening position now has been fully marginalized.
Definitely. It's a fantastic success in that regard. But we haven't had a success like that. In fact, I think I wrote this in The Nation this week. It's the most successful intervention of that kind since Silent Spring.
Now, you're still left with the tough part about what do you specifically do on the policy level to then address the question. There's all sorts of divisions within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I leave that to Jonathan Cohn, whatever he's in favor of.
Oh, no, global warming. On global warming.
Oh, global warming.
In Giving You Truth successful, I think, got the public, in the same place that we have to do something about it. And that leaves the tougher question, what exactly is that?
Dude, we're at 45 minutes and 19 seconds. A. B, my phone is about to die.
Okay.
C, my camera is still screwing up, and I'm going to get yelled at by Bob Wright. We can't solve global warming right now.
No, we cannot.
Okay.
But I wanted to be curious to see if Michael Moore's film can do something parallel to Giving You Truth, where everyone's at the point where, yes, we have to do something to fix the broken healthcare system, and then we get to the point where we have to worry about the policy details.
I'll leave the policy details to you. I'm a big picture man.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.